Hello everyone and welcome to my crochet channel. In this video, I'll demonstrate my signature invisible seam for projects made with slip stitch ribbing, also known as Bosnian crochet. This technique creates a seam that is perfectly invisible on both the right and wrong sides. It's especially suited for projects like these incredibly elastic socks, which mimic a knitted 1x1 rib and have a side seam that is completely undetectable. For this work, we will need contrasting yarn, waste yarn for the foundation row, main yarn, in the example, purple, a crochet hook of a suitable size, a wool needle, tapestry needle with a wide eye. For items crocheted with slip stitches, I always use a foundation row with a contrasting yarn. This is the key to creating an invisible seam. Take the crochet hook and the contrasting yarn. Make a chain of the required number of chain stitches. For the sample, I have chained 20 stitches. First row of the pattern. Take the main color yarn, purple, and make one turning chain. Turn the foundation chain so the wrong side is facing you. You will see the back bumps or the back ridges on each chain stitch. I insert my hook into the back bump, pull the yarn through, and draw it straight through the loop on my hook to make a slip stitch. I'll continue working stitches like this to the end of the row. A chain stitch has a front loop, a back loop, and back bumps. In the first row, I insert the hook into the back bumps. I'll have 20 slip stitches in this row, which is the same as the number of chains I started with. You'll make the same number of stitches in every row. I'm coming to the end of the row. I'll work these last few stitches the same way, into the back bumps. And that completes the first row. And this is what you should have. Row 2 and all subsequent rows, at the beginning of each row, make one turning chain and turn the work. Starting from the second row, work all stitches exclusively into the back loop only. Insert the hook into the second stitch from the hook in the back loop only and work a slip stitch. Continue working one slip stitch in the back loop only of each stitch to the end of the row. Work the fabric to the required length in this manner to get this kind of texture. To seam this item, I need a long tail of yarn. This tail must be long enough to have worked this row with the crochet hook. Here at the end, I have one open loop. It has dropped a little bit now. Here it is. I thread the yarn onto the needle and close this loop with the needle. Like so. And we tighten it. Next, I position this item as follows. The contrasting foundation yarn is at the bottom. The loop is in the top right corner. It's more comfortable for me to seam this way, and I move on to the seaming itself. Now look, the contrasting yarn is wrapping around the purple threads of the first row. And I do the exact same thing with the needle. The contrasting yarn, in this case, is a guide yarn. The contrasting yarn has wrapped around these two little threads. I insert the needle and pull it out. I tighten it. Next, I return the needle into the open loop that we closed in the previous step, like so. I tighten it, and then I insert the needle into the next stitch towards myself and into the loop that was just created. And I tighten it. Here is the first stitch, and you see it looks absolutely the same as all the other stitches. Okay, to the next point. Again, I look at how the contrasting yarn wraps around my threads of the first row. There, I insert the needle like this and bring it out. And, naturally, I tighten it. You need to sew with the same tension that you crocheted with so that the seam's tension doesn't stand out. Next, I bring the needle into the loop and into the edge stitch from which the yarn came out in the previous step, like so, and again. And again, I tighten everything. Now, into the next edge stitch, again towards myself, and again into the loop that was just created. And again, I tighten everything. Again, I look at how the contrasting yarn wraps around the threads of the first row, like so. I insert, I tighten. Into the loop, into the edge stitch. Away from you. Into the edge stitch, into the loop. Towards you. I tighten. Again, I look at how the contrasting yarn picks up the stitches of the first row, and I do the same thing. I pull it out, into the loop, into the edge stitch, away from you. And I tighten. Into the edge stitch, into the loop, towards you. And again. I pick up the two threads that the contrasting yarn is wrapping around. I pull it out, into the loop, into the edge stitch, away from you. And into the next edge stitch, and into the loop, towards you. And again, I pick up the two threads that the contrasting yarn is wrapping around. Into the loop, into the edge stitch, away from you. Into the next edge stitch, and into the loop, towards you. And again, I pick up the threads that the contrasting yarn is wrapping around. Into the loop, into the edge stitch. Into the edge stitch. Into the loop. And this is the kind of little seam you get This is one side. On the first side, the contrasting yarn is still there, but I will remove it in the end. Again, I pick up the 2 threads and into the loop and into the edge stitch. And into the next edge stitch and into the loop that was just created. I work like this to the end of the row, and I sew all of these loops together. I'm approaching the end of the row, continuing to seam just as I was.
I pick up the 2 threads that the contrasting yarn is wrapping around, into the loop, into the edge stitch, into the next edge stitch, into the loop. Again, I pick up the 2 threads, into the loop, into the edge stitch, into the next edge stitch, into the loop. Again, I pick up the 2 threads, into the loop, into the edge stitch, into the edge stitch, into the loop. I pick up the 2 threads, into the loop, into the edge stitch, into the edge stitch, into the loop. I pick up the 2 threads, into the loop, into the edge stitch, into the edge stitch, into the loop. I pick up the 2 threads, into the loop, into the edge stitch, into the edge stitch, into the loop. 2 stitches remain. Again, I pick up the 2 threads, into the loop, into the edge stitch, into the edge stitch, into the loop. Okay, the second to last stitch, into the loop, into the edge stitch, into the edge stitch, into the loop. And the last stitch, I pick up the last 2 threads, I guide the needle into the loop, into the edge stitch, and with that, the seaming of this item is finished. Here, look, I had the beginning tail and the ending tail, and these 2 tails met at one point, and I just tie them like this into a knot. In any item, a sock, a hat, in fingerless gloves, they always meet at one point, and in the end, I always just make a little knot here, and then I unravel the contrasting yarn. Because the contrasting yarn was worked in the first row, not into the back loop, but into the back bump, it will unravel easily and simply in one motion. You just need to open this edge. I open the edge. And don't be afraid, just pull on this thread. It comes out easily and simply, like this. Precisely because the first row was crocheted into the back bump. Let's look at the wrong side. Here was my knot.
just this easily. And that's it. The sock is now seamed. All that's left for me is to sew the toes, and I can try it on, wear it. Like so. Everything came out easily. I seamed the sock. I seamed the sock itself. And here's how it turns out. Look. It hasn't been washed yet. This sock has not undergone wet blocking. It has already laid so beautifully, so elegantly on its own. Look how beautiful it is.
I will leave a link below to the detailed video on knitting, on the main principle of knitting such socks. So go ahead, check the description, there will be a link to a detailed video on how I knit such socks. I hope you liked this video. Thanks in advance for your likes, for watching my video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.